So those first two methods, and this set of methods here, predominantly focus on individual texts themselves, predominantly from the original types of meaning or the original questions of meaning, original audiences. Theological research, on the other hand, is not as focused on breaking down texts and those aspects of text. Instead, theological research is focused on the ideas found within text. How does a particular author construct ideas together to offer theology? How do different ideas relate to each other? Thinking about the reasonableness of ideas, it's very similar to kind of a philosophical approach, in the sense of you're focused on ideas rather than specific texts. Although, of course, text would be important in all this. Often theological research falls into two different categories: descriptive research or normative research. Descriptive research is just seeking to describe the theological background or the theological development of a particular individual or text. This is what Augustine, a 4th century Christian, this is his theology. Normative theological research is seeking to develop a set of principles or information or a body of knowledge that should be applicable to everyone, all Christians everywhere, throughout all times. Right? That this is something that should be followed. Descriptive research just tends to be, this is what the theology was. And it may or may not be an encouragement to follow the theology of Augustine or the theology of Thomas Aquinas or any of another number of other Christian authors. If, in general, descriptive theological research isn't going to involve exegesis so much, unless it is, exegeting a specific text, whether that's a writing from Thomas Aquinas or Augustine, or if you're doing the theology of Paul, for example, you might engage in exegesis. If you're doing normative research, exegesis would be much more important, in that you're trying to draw these conclusions and make this appeal to other people that they should follow this. So you need to be able to convince those people and rely on the text. But the broader focus of theological research is on the message of either what you're trying to construct or what another author has said. And so exegesis is only a component of all of that, not the overall goal. And then finally, theological research would be the area where you get into application more, especially if you're doing normative research. Descriptive research, again, may or may not have that application component. That might not be something that is necessarily a part of that. Historical research, of course, investigates the actions, behaviors, deeds, thoughts of people in the past and tries to make sense of them, interpret them for a contemporary audience. History is not just talking about the past. History is talking about what the past means. And so not just data about this person lived then, and this person lived then, and this person wrote this book at this time. What does that all mean, right? The discipline of history is trying to make some sense of events in the past. And so historians are concerned about a couple of different things. And some historians have referred to these as the 5 C's of historical thinking. These are things that historians pay attention to, are interested in asking when it comes to events of the past. So, for example, historians are interested in change over time. Things do not remain the same. Why is it they change? How have they changed? What is it that leads to developments that take place? And so historians are very interested in how things change, not necessarily how they stay the same. Historians are also very concerned about context. Now that, of course, might be like a biblical scholar would be, right? I'm reading this document, so I'm reading this particular passage, so what's the context of the rest of the document so I can make sense of this passage? But then also kind of the larger context, like the cultural context. What's going on in the world around this person? What are the things that shape this person? And so what's it like at this time? Causality, also an important part of historical thinking. In a sense, the argument that most historians would say is that human beings make choices in history or in the past, and those choices have effects. So, thinking about what choices did people make? How did that have an impact? Is what we're talking about when we're talking about causality. Contingency, on the other hand, is also a recognition that sometimes it's not just our choices. While we are agents that can make choices, sometimes those choices are shaped by forces larger than ourselves, and sometimes we don't recognize that we are the product of our culture, our past, our family, all sorts of different things that can shape us in a way in which we don't have an agency. And so we were led to a specific conclusion, or we develop a certain set of behaviors, not because we've chosen intentionally, but we've been shaped by our culture around us. And so those two things, of course, are intention. Right? Causality suggests that human beings shape their surroundings. Contingency suggests that surroundings shape individuals. And so the historian, of course, has to hold those in tension, because sometimes it's a mixture of both. And then finally, historians recognize that the past is complex. The Past is a Foreign Country is the title of a book one historian wrote. When we go and look at things in the past, the further back we go, of course, the further we are from our own time, and making it more difficult to understand the past. But even if we're talking about 19th century, 18th century, there's still a foreignness in how we think about people who lived at that time. Furthermore, the behaviors of people often don't line up with what we want them to be. The people are complex. They're not always consistent in their thinking. So, for example, Thomas Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence, and in that document, he writes that all men are created equal. Yet, he also holds slaves. Right? And he's not interested in freeing those slaves. He's not interested in getting rid of the practice of slavery. Why? Because he's complex, right? It's not just a matter of what his ideals were. There was the lived experience as well. And so sometimes people that we are really, we read some thinking about from a person. We think, oh, this is great. This person he's got such deep thoughts, and they're so important, and they're so, they're so impactful, and just could change society. And then we find out a little bit about their lives, and we think, whoa, is this the same person? Right? So people often didn't live up to the kind of things that they intended, or that we would like them to live up to. And so, complex or the complexity of the past is an important part of our recognition there. Finally, the last type of research is ministerial research. This is, again, as we said, the more practical type of research. This might be congregational studies, where you're seeking to investigate the makeup of congregation, how a congregation operates, looking at a specific congregation, trying to draw some conclusions, to help that congregation or to help other congregations. Might be involved in case studies, where you're observing a particular minister, or again a particular congregation, where you're really trying to investigate deeply, what life is like in that congregation. But again, the purpose as well is that you're trying to express, that this is something that would help other people, either to avoid some things or to adopt some things. Often ministerial research is focused on particular issues, and within either a specific congregation, or you're interested in an issue, right? How congregations handle domestic violence, how congregations handle alcoholism, teenage sexuality, right? And so a lot of that is, a lot of ministerial research tends to be issue-driven rather than other types of focus. And as we've mentioned before, in ministerial research, the focus tends to be more practical. Not that theology can't be practical, not that exegesis can't be practical, but it's very practical, very pragmatic. The focus is on specific situations and addressing specific situations and trying to develop some sort of process or set of processes or an example that will help congregation, help Christians. Again, that's not to say other types of research can't be practical or pragmatic, but this is one of the things that tends to be the focus of ministerial research rather than other types of research that we've talked about. So that finishes up, gives us a good idea of the different type of research that can be done in biblical studies, some basics about that, and some other types of things related to research. The next class will focus on what are some ways to go about finding sources. So once I have a topic, once I have an idea, what do I do to begin to find sources, to begin to find literature that will help me understand this topic? And so we'll address that in the next class.